Welcome to Ditch Disordered Eating with Dana, where we learn how to build a healthy relationship with food. What if you could wake up every day and didn't have to think about food or your body? What if you woke up and thought about all of your potential and the ability to focus on your goals in life? Hi, I'm your host, Dana Wells, registered dietitian, nutritionist, and counselor. Together, we will explore different types of eating disorders and how to improve our negative cognitions with food. Stay tuned. Ditch Disordered Eating with Dana starts now. Hi, and here we are, another episode of Ditch Disordered Eating with Dana. Thank you for joining us. I'm Dana Wells, registered dietitian, licensed professional counselor, and I specialize in eating disorders. And I'm here with my colleague and co-host, Greta O'Donnell. Greta, you want to say hello?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, Dana. I am Greta O'Donnell. I am a registered dietitian and specializing in eating disorders, and I'm happy to be here today.
Yeah, so the topic of our show today is anorexia nervosa. So we've talked a couple, our first show was just about eating disorders in general. And then we talked about the difference between disordered eating and eating disorder. And today we're going to talk specifically about anorexia nervosa. And this morning I decided to look up some statistics just so we could get an idea of, the severity of anorexia nervosa. And so what I came up with is from the Journal of Eating Disorders, we have that 28.8 million Americans will have an eating disorder in their lifetime, which is pretty significant. And that the overall lifetime prevalence of eating disorders is estimated to be 8% among females and 4% among males. It also shared with me that every 52 minutes, one person dies as a direct consequence of an eating disorder. So, when we talk about the severity, we know that eating disorders have the second highest mortality rate of any psychiatric illness behind opioid addiction. So, we wanted to bring the show to you because of the importance and the severity of eating disorders and how many Americans suffer with that. What we're seeing now is we're seeing children as early as 8, 9, and 10 having early onset eating disorders. And we also see that individuals who are over age 50 also suffer with eating disorders. And I think a lot of people think that eating disorders is a young person's problem. And that's actually not true. We see a lot of individuals in our practice that are over 50 with eating disorders. And what we found here is that many individuals are confronted with an eating disorder for their first time in their 30s and 40s. And sometimes they end up having what we call severe and enduring eating disorders through their 50s and later. And we're actually going to have a guest on our next show who is over 50 and has been suffering with anorexia nervosa for quite some time and her journey to recovery. So that is kind of the precedence of our show today. How many clients would you say you have with anorexia nervosa specifically?
That's a good question. I would say about 75% of my clients suffer with anorexia, and it is a really tragic disease diagnosis to go through. And I think that's why these facts are so important to share, because it's not always understood the danger, and people kind of normalize some of the things that are happening with anorexia, and it's really, really dangerous game to play. So it's so important to seek help, and that's what we're here for, and to educate everyone on what to look for and how to get through this.
Yeah, and eating disorders, all of our eating disorders, but anorexia nervosa, we see a lot of different types of things that present with individuals with anorexia nervosa, whether it's trauma of some sort, or being bullied in some way, or just, all the pressures of society to be a certain weight. And so there's so many things that are complex when it comes to having anorexia nervosa. Now, we love our DSM, which is our diagnostic manual, which Greta's got over here. And this gives us kind of the play-by-play of how we diagnose anorexia nervosa and our different eating disorders and what it really means to have anorexia nervosa. So actually, Greta is going to read off the specifics which qualify someone for having anorexia nervosa. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so there's going to be three kind of like bullet points under the diagnosis of anorexia nervosa. The first one being restriction of energy intake relative to requirements, leading to a significantly low body weight in the context of age, sex, developmental trajectory, and physical health. Significantly low weight is defined as a weight that is less than minimally normal, or for children and adolescents, less than minimally expected.
So when we talk about, minimally between adults and children, everyone has different markers. So a lot of people think about the BMI, but when we're talking about young kids, it's actually more a weight chart. So a height weight chart that's specific to how old they are and where they should be on that scale. And then the BMI is used more for adults. But the BMI can be skewed too. So sometimes we have to be careful about that. So we do try to use several different avenues to make sure that we're measuring if a client is underweight. And what's the second thing that comes with us, Greta?
Yes, so that's the first one. The second one being intense fear of gaining weight or of becoming fat, or persistent behavior that interferes with weight gain, even though at a significantly low weight. And so with the word fat, it comes up a lot in our sessions with clients. It's a descriptor a lot of clients use to call themselves, in a negative way. I usually will challenge a client to use a different word. Maybe you're feeling like uncomfortable in your body. Maybe you're feeling bigger than you used to feel. Like, what does fat mean is a question I ask most of my clients on their first session, because it's very subjective. People can think that they are too big or too small at different heights, weights. So it's important to kind of talk to a client and identify what that word means to them.
Absolutely. And often what we'll talk about too is, body dysmorphia. And, specifically when we see anorexia nervosa, a lot of clients are perceive their body in a different way. And so they're looking in the mirror and they're seeing someone that's much bigger than they actually are. And so we do a lot of work with what we call reframing thoughts and having clients really be able to see that what they're seeing and what they're imagining isn't really what's happening, or isn't true to what's really going on. So we'll have a client that's extremely underweight, and it doesn't matter what the scale says. They still feel that they are extremely heavy. So, and body dysmorphia and dysmorphic disorder kind of come up in that with anorexia. And we might even have a show about that one of these days. So important to make sure that if you are perceiving yourself in a certain way, and so many individuals are telling you that that's not true, you might want to really see a professional to find out if maybe you do have some body dysmorphia. It's really important. And then the third thing for anorexia nervosa is what?
Disturbance in the way in which one's body weight or shape is experienced, undue influence of body weight or shape on self-evaluation, or persistent lack of recognition of the seriousness of the current low body weight, which kind of does go hand in hand with the body dysmorphia that we were talking about, and the kind of influence on how your body image impacts your day-to-day, how much distress you're feeling. Because even if someone's not struggling with an eating disorder, they might have moments of, I'm not loving the way that I look in the mirror this morning, but that doesn't necessarily cause them to change the way that they eat or behaviors that day. With someone with anorexia, that rules their thoughts all day long. So that's kind of the difference between just typical body image disturbance versus the anorexia.
Yes. And important to recognize that there's certain other criteria that you need to kind of follow, but individuals can have some disordered eating that could be leading into an anorexic type of diagnosis. So it's important to be able to look for those signs and symptoms, and we'll talk about that as well. And there's also subtypes with anorexia. So we have a restricting type, and then we have a binging purging type. So what does that mean? Someone with anorexia nervosa who completely just restricts themselves from food. So they're not necessarily trying to get rid of food by throwing up or anything like that. They just don't eat, or they eat very, very little, to the point where they're malnourished. And there's different signs that you can notice when it comes to malnourishment, including lab signs. Individuals have something called lanugo hair, or they get fine hair on their skin, and lack of overall brain function too. We see clients that are severely anorexic. They have trouble with memory. There's all sorts of different things that we could go over, but we don't have that much time, and we also want to talk about how we're treating it. But there's also the binge eating, purging kind of type. So what does that mean? What does purging mean? Purging means that you're getting rid of food or caloric restriction in a certain type of way. So we have exercise, we have drugs. Sometimes clients will use drugs. Sometimes clients will use laxative. So we see clients struggling with laxative abuse. What else do some of your clients suffer with when it comes to that?
Yeah, I would, those are all the first ones that come to mind. Over-exercise is definitely one that I see a lot. So there's usually some compensating, behavior at times with binging. So it's sometimes clients will kind of go through like a cycle with the different subtypes of their anorexia, and it can be confusing. Like, do I still qualify for this diagnosis because I've got this? And eating disorders, like, they're sneaky. They kind of weave their way in different vulnerable moments, and they present in different ways. So it's not always just like by the book of a definition.
Absolutely. There's so many subsets of anorexia. And sometimes clients will say, well, do I have binge eating disorder? Do I have anorexia? Do I have another type of disorder? And so you really need to kind of see what is recognizing. And normally with anorexia nervosa, we're really having trouble with nutrition and weight. Individuals sometimes who restrict but also binge will see that their weight can be normal, but they're still struggling with eating disorders in a different kind of subset. But anorexia is one of the most dangerous because of the nutrition deficiencies. And so when we think about that and we think about how to help individuals with eating disorders, there's a lot of different ways. One of the main things is that an individual really needs to go see a registered dietitian and get a proper diagnosis, because often people say that they have eating disorder, or they feel that they don't have an eating disorder, but they're using all these compensatory behaviors, right? So it's important that you understand where you are with your eating, and if you're moving into a disordered eating pattern. In kids, sometimes we see them throwing their lunch out, hiding food in their room, starting to eat smaller amounts of meals, or just saying that they're not hungry. And parents often see them start losing a significant amount of weight or increasing their exercise. What else do you see with your clients, especially your younger kiddos?
Yeah, more of a preoccupation with what they're eating. Hey, mom, like, this yogurt has a lot of added sugar, concerns that never really were brought up before, or something that's not spoken about in the house. So, if there's kind of this, newfound interest, and, it crosses that line of, okay, this is becoming a little bit excessive. That's what I'll see with younger clients.
Yeah. And what we see with all our clients is that, they start to eliminate food groups, and they have these good foods and these bad foods, right? So all of a sudden clients have fear foods, or they start eliminating food groups. Oh, they start eating carbohydrates, and then they stop eating stop eating carbohydrates, or they start limiting their fats, or they'll cut out, fun foods like desserts and things of that nature. So you really need to be on top of, if you start seeing a loved one, starting eliminate different types of food groups, because this can be the first sign into some disordered eating that could lead into an eating disorder. So what we're going to talk about after our break is how we help our clients and how we can help you think about changing your behavior with food and really finding new ways to have a healthier relationship with food. So I think we're going to talk about that after our short break.
Sounds good.
Thank you, and welcome back to Ditch Disordered Eating with Dana. Today we're talking about anorexia nervosa, and we are coming up from talking about the statistics and things to how can we help clients with anorexia nervosa? What do we do in our practice? What are things that can help you if you're struggling with an eating disorder, specifically anorexia? So our first thing is we try to get rid of rules and restrictions and help clients reframe thoughts. So so many rules with anorexia nervosa. So we were talking before the break about, restrictions on different types of food. So not eating carbohydrates, stop eating fats, just focusing on proteins, or really restrict dieting in terms of calorie or calorie counting. So at our practice, we really try to help clients not have a good and bad type of attitude towards foods and really get away from counting calories. We don't use the word calorie at our practice. We don't use the word diet. And when we talk about food, we feel all foods are good, right? Of course, there's some things that, you want to concentrate more than others. So for example, you want to have the right balance of carbohydrates, proteins, fats, right? And your minerals and things from fruits and your vitamins from fruits and vegetables. But you also can go out and have desserts and have treats and the things that, we often enjoy when we're in a celebratory mood. What do you find that your clients struggle with the most when they're restricting like certain foods or using those words good and bad? Is that a huge struggle for you and getting them to kind of change the way that they speak?
It's very ingrained. So there's,
Yeah.
it's this kind of like constant dialogue in their head. And that's where we will identify an eating disorder voice telling you, like, don't have that slice of pizza. There's too much this, that. And the education is so important for clients. Usually our second session with them is nutrition education of like, what are carbs? What do they do for the body? There's no such thing as a bad food. I always say, unless it's like moldy or you're allergic to it, you can have it. Everything, there's nothing off limits, because when you start to create this like hierarchy of foods, you're like attaching your moral value to the foods that you're eating. So when you say I'm eating broccoli and like, salmon, I'm good, I'm a better person. But when I have like a chocolate chip cookie or, a cheeseburger, I'm a bad person, which that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself. So trying to just kind of take that out of your thought dialogue with food and kind of just going more facts, like this food has a little bit more like vitamin, intensity. Some foods have a little bit more of like a fun component to your day. So there's physical nourishment in food and emotional nourishment, like homemade chocolate chip cookies that your mom made on the counter. That's emotionally nourishing. That's really important. So is having like a really great bowl of oatmeal with fiber and those nutrition components. So they both need to exist in that space.
Yeah. And I think it's important that, when we do talk about that, that we really do help our clients change their vocabulary, because there is a lot of negative talk. And so, not using the word good and bad, not using the word calorie. We like to talk about things in food groups and exchanges. So this is a starch exchange. This is a carbohydrate, or a carbohydrate exchange. This is a protein exchange, and really talking about things more in a variety and a certain amount. So we might say, you have 8 carbohydrates in your day and you have 12 protein exchanges in your day and 6 fats in your day, and then we put together a meal plan for individuals that isn't so strict. So it's not you have to eat this amount of food and you can't eat anything else. And we always encourage clients to have a fun meal. We actually have a little simple guide to meal planning book that all of our clients get. And it helps them understand mindful eating and things of that nature. So we're always moving towards what we call mindful eating, which we should do a whole show on mindful eating one day, because you can mindfully eat your way into the hospital, we like to say, right? So when we think about mindful eating, we really think about how are you approaching food? How is the food nourishing you? How much are you getting, and are you getting enough, right? And on the other scale for binge eating disorder, are you getting a little bit too much? And really thinking about how you can change your relationship with food and have a healthy relationship with food, as well as your body. Like you said, I'm fat, or or I feel really overweight today, right? And really saying, is that really what you're feeling in the body, or are you just feeling uncomfortable in your body because you have kind of these eating disorder tendencies, right? And this body kind of dysmorphia that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. And food is like the key here. So a lot of times with these kind of like mentalities with food. If a client's under eating, they're not going to be able to get there. So sometimes the first goal is like, let's just get you more nourished. And then this will start to fall a little bit more into place. So, if you kind of change your behaviors around food, your brain catches up, but sometimes there's a lag. So the beginning, the first couple of weeks with an anorexic client is usually like, this is really hard. I'm anxious every day. I'm so worried my body's changing. And that's where I will say, like, you have to trust me. You have to trust this process. This is what you need right now. And it's so hard to do that for these clients because, I'm a stranger to them in the beginning. And, over time, there is trust that's built. But kind of knowing that the best thing you can do is give yourself the nourishment that you need, but your brain doesn't always get there until it has the energy intake to get you to that spot.
Yeah, I mean, when we think about, anorexia nervosa and the nerves around food, there's so much anxiety, there's so much fear. Sometimes we see the OCD behaviors, there's lots of depression. So, you need to really meet the person where they're at. And if they have a lot of fear around food, you need to kind of slowly talk about what is it that is so scary about this food, and what is the misinformation that you have. And we really try to guide our clients into a different direction to understand that food isn't the enemy. It's really all of the fear and the thoughts that they have around that. So we could talk about that forever, but we don't have a lot of time. So let's talk about, food challenges and food education. So what could we say to a client today that struggles with food and is afraid of eating? Like, what would that look like?
Kind of, I think like dissecting, like, where's the fear coming from? So like, where did you learn that? Like, where did you, like, people will say, I'm scared of fat. It's going to make me fat. Like, okay, like, give me a little bit more. And usually well, my mom one time mentioned, or like, I saw a TikTok that this happens. So it's like, okay, well, let's first of all make sure this is evidence-based, wherever that's coming from. Now, let me actually tell you what fat does to the body. And like, that body is very good at regulating and telling you what it needs if you're listening. But the problem with anorexia is your hunger cues are often pretty dull. So clients will say, I don't feel hungry enough to eat this much food, Greta. Like, I mean, I can't, I'm too full. And it's like your body will get used to it. And so you gotta have to give it that chance. So sometimes it's like, let's have another bite. Or like, if you really can't finish dinner and that's the portion on your meal plan, I want you to save it for a little bit and try again and use like coping skills. And that's why it's so important that they work with clients, also see a therapist or a mental health professional to talk about how to cope with some of that. That's like out of a dietitian's scope to always address. But there are some tools that we can tell clients, just some like breathing exercises, ways to kind of calm down that anxiety with kind of a fear food or a challenge food.
Absolutely. And, working in conjunction with a therapist is so important because people think the eating disorder stems from food, but like I was talking about earlier, it stems from so many other things. And there is so much misinformation out there about, food and eating disorder. So it's important to also get to the bottom of, why am I feeling this way about myself? And why am I so afraid of food? And why am I so afraid of, that I'm not skinny enough, right? And so a lot of misinformation about there. So if you feel like you're struggling with disordered eating or an eating disorder, it's really important that you go to a registered dietitian and a licensed professional counselor or, therapist and psychiatrist to really help you get through what is at the bottom of this. I know, for me, at the bottom of my eating disorder was a lot of, trauma. As well as a lot of low self-esteem. And the way that I looked at myself was completely different than, what reality was. So we really need to get down to what's really happening. I have a client currently that I'm seeing that she, was really bullied when she was younger. She was also an athlete. And she was a star athlete, and she ended up injuring herself. And so her body started changing through puberty and through her injuries. And she really kind of got in her head because, she was growing into a different body, and she was still the same person and still the same body, but it wasn't performing the way that it used to be able to because she had injuries. And so we really needed to talk a lot about, what is the psychological things that are going on right now with your brain, and, what is really happening. It's really not about the food. It's what's happening with the changes in, your life and what you've had to deal with. And another thing that we figured out was, her whole identity was tied to her athleticism. And she didn't really know who she was or felt that she had any other purpose than to be an athlete. So we really spent a lot of time in therapy talking about, what else, like you're not just a gymnast, right? You're so much more than that. And we are all so much more than just our bodies and, our either our sport or our job or what have you, right? So it's very important that we really look at the whole picture of what's going on with that particular client, because it's not just about the food.
Absolutely. Sometimes for clients, their eating disorder can numb themselves from whatever they're dealing with or they can't deal with. So it's actually interesting. A lot of times when clients become more nourished and fed, actually emotions are coming up. They've kind of restricted their emotions and food at the same time. Mm-hmm. So they're doing steady and then they're eating more. And now they're like, I'm so emotional. And actually it's a good thing because it's like, this means that you are fed enough to be processing these things. But it's tricky because that's why some of these clients turn to restriction in the first place, to stop feeling their grief or their trauma.
Yeah, there's a lot of fear there, fear around foods, fear around gaining weight, fear of, not being like everyone else, fitting into a certain group. So, it's interesting because once clients start to recover and once clients start to regain, their weight and they're more nourished, they say to me, I never thought that I could live this way without anxiety. And, the freedom that comes with being able to go to a restaurant or sit down to dinner and be able to eat whatever, you want and not have anxiety about it, right? Because often they're sitting down or they're really nervous about going somewhere. Sometimes clients even don't go to events because they're so worried and preoccupied about the food. So one of the big things about recovering from an eating disorder is just the freedom to be able to enjoy food and feel good in your body and not have all of that anxiety and depression. So there's so many good things that come out of ditching disordered eating and having the freedom with food. And again, at all ages. So our next topic we're going to talk about is, again, we talked about in the beginning of the show, is a lot of individuals who are over 50 suffer with eating disorders. And I think sometimes that gets lost, right? We think that it's really just a younger clientele. And so being able to explore that and be able to have someone that talks about that from a personal standpoint is going to be really cool. And we're going to have a guest on our next show that's going to share some stuff with us. Is there anything else that you'd like to share in our show today, Greta?
I mean, I think that kind of wraps it up, but just to kind of echo the point of like food freedom is the goal. And like, it's so cool to watch clients come back from like their first vacation in recovery and be like, I scuba dived, I ate like fresh seafood off the beach. And I'm like, and you didn't say anything about your body looking weird in the bikini or the fear. And they're like, oh yeah, I kind of forgot about that. It's like, yeah. Wow, like that's that moment for me. I'm like, this is why we do what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Having that freedom to be able to just go anywhere and not be preoccupied with food or your body. And that's kind of why we are bringing the show to you. So we're going to continue to do that. Next show, we're going to talk and have a guest, which is going to be great. We look forward to the next episode. So thanks so much for joining us. I'm Dana Wells, registered dietitian, licensed professional counselor, and my lovely colleague and co-host, Greta O'Donnell, registered dietitian. So thanks so much and have a healthy week. Thank you for tuning in. You have been listening to Ditch Disordered Eating with me, Dana Wells. We have been discussing different types of eating disorders. Tune in every fourth Monday of the month, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Transformation Talk Radio to find out how you can free yourself from negative cognitions related to food and your body. You can have a healthy relationship with food. For more resources and guidelines, connect with me at my website, anuonline.com. That's ANUE online.com.